Raptors are stuck in the same predicament as they were last year. So I was scrolling through social media and I was scrolling through articles, and I came across a story about the Toronto Raptors. And in the story, it was reported by Michael Grange. He's a reporter for Sportsnet. So he covers the Toronto Raptors extensively. He's kind of like a beat writer, but not really. But anyways, he reported that the Toronto Raptors, well, the Toronto Raptors management, the higher-ups, they feel like their roster is not at all inferior to teams in the Eastern Conference that we've seen go deeper into the playoffs. So they feel as if they are on the same level, almost, in terms of roster, as the Miami Heat, who just went to the NBA Finals, or the Boston Celtics. Now, that's incredibly delusional, right? Why? Well, the Toronto Raptors got bounced out in the play-in tournament by the Chicago Bulls. The Miami Heat beat the Chicago Bulls in the play-in tournament. The Miami Heat also then went on to go to the finals. So I don't know why the Toronto Raptors would think their roster right now is good. I don't know why the Toronto Raptors front office or management is so in love with this iteration of the Toronto Raptors roster. I don't like this roster, right? I've been screaming for a few years now that something needs to change from the Toronto Raptors. And if it doesn't, then they're going to stay stagnant. They're going to be a middle of the pack type of team in which they're not good enough for lottery picks and they're not good enough to go into the playoffs. And that's what we've seen from the Toronto Raptors in the past 2 years or so, right? In the last 2 years, what has happened? The Toronto Raptors lost in a play-in tournament this year to the Chicago Bulls, a team they could have easily beat. I mean, if you go back to watch that game, the Toronto Raptors were leading by a huge margin in the first half, right? And then they choked, and Patrick Beverley made fun of them. And then if you go last year to the playoffs, what happened? The Toronto Raptors lost in the second round to the Philadelphia 76ers. And if you go back in 2021, they lost again in the second round. I'm forgetting exactly to which team, but they lost in the second round, right? So they've become this middle of the pack team in which they just consistently lose at the first or second round of the playoffs, right? And it's been like that since Kawhi Leonard left and since Kyle Lowry left. So to me, it's clearly obvious what the problem is. This current iteration has hit its ceiling. It's stagnated. There's nothing this iteration, and when I mean this iteration of the Toronto Raptors, I mean the Pascal Siakam-led Toronto Raptors with Fred VanVleet as their second best player, with Gary Trent Jr. You're not going to do anything in the Eastern Conference, right? So that's why I have a problem with this report, because it's extremely delusional. No way are the Toronto Raptors on the same level as the Miami Heat. I mean, you guys know that. The Miami Heat went to the finals. They just beat the Boston Celtics. Do you think the Raptors would have beaten the same Boston Celtics that the Heat beat? No. Like, do you think the Toronto Raptors would have beat the Milwaukee Bucks and then the Boston Celtics and then take a game off of the Denver Nuggets? No, not at all. So to me, it's always been clear that something needs to change. Massive overhaul needs to happen. And as a Toronto Raptors fan, I'm a little bit frustrated because the offseason has started and teams are making moves in order to better their rosters, right? The new owner of the Phoenix Suns, when he came in, he wasted no time, right? The Phoenix Suns, prior to the new owner, never made any big moves. Like, for my whole lifetime, the Phoenix Suns sucked. He came in there, right? And in the last 3 years, the Phoenix Suns have traded for Chris Paul and traded Chris Paul away. They have gotten Kevin Durant and they've gotten Bradley Beal. He is making moves in order to make the roster better now, like buying in. Kristaps Porzingis just got traded to the Boston Celtics. Boston Celtics lost to the Miami Heat and they're already improving the roster. So when I see moves like that, things teams are doing in order to better their roster, and I look at my Toronto Raptors and they're not doing anything, it's stagnant, nothing, right? They're holding on to these players that I know just aren't good enough. They're not good enough for where we want to be as a team. I get frustrated, especially when I go back and I think about what Masai Ujiri said right after they lost to the Chicago Bulls in the play-in tournament. He said major changes were coming to the Toronto Raptors. Granted, he did make a huge change. He hired the assistant coach of the Memphis Grizzlies. And so the Toronto Raptors have a new head coach, right? But that's not good enough. Roster changes need to happen.